Welcome to the Mr. Productivity Podcast. I have got an incredible guest for you on the show today. The gentleman's name is Mark Simon. He's known as the Godfather. The Godfather of storyboarding. He's got an offer you can't refuse. With over 35 years in the entertainment industry and work on more than 6,000 productions, Mark has left his mark on iconic shows. You probably never heard of these shows: Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, Dexter. He's a prolific author, a TEDx speaker, and animation producer. Mark's experience spanned from storyboarding to directing, making him a true veteran of visual storytelling. Mark, welcome to the show.
Mark, great to see you again. Always a good time when we get together.
This is Mark's second time on this show, but he was on the show when it used to be known as the Mark Struczewski Podcast. Now it's known as the Mr. Productivity Podcast. And we are going to talk a lot about productivity, but I got to start. Well, I don't have to. I want to.
You want
my
to,
show
yeah.
about The Walking Dead. So I didn't start watching The Walking Dead until about the fourth season. My younger daughter, she's 26 now, always be my baby. She introduced me to the show and I got hooked on it. I watched every episode. And then when we connected, I'm like, you actually worked on The Walking Dead, like storyboarding. Yeah. How cool is that?
I'll tell you, it was a dream come true. Anytime I get to work on something I'm a huge fan of, it's just so exciting. I started working on The Walking Dead on season 9. And I was living in Orlando at the time, decided my kids were graduating from high school. And my wife and I said, let's get out of Florida. Let's go to where there's more production again. And Atlanta was just booming like crazy. So I landed the job to storyboard The Walking Dead before I completed the move. So literally, as I was settling into my house, I was drawing on The Walking Dead. And since then, I've done 9 seasons across 5 different shows of that series, and it never gets old drawing zombies and blood and gore and explosions. It's heaven for an artist.
Now, this is one of the benefits. If you're watching this on video, Spotify video, or YouTube, Mark was kind enough to send me this, which is his storyboards from Stranger Things. Now, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify Audible, go check out the video because I can't show you the picture on an audio podcast. Audio podcast, eventually is going to say that. And Mark has a new book out, which is why he's on the show today. Start at the Top, Stories to Help You Succeed. Oh, you got the same book. I mean,
it's amazing.
Paying dues is for other people. I got to ask you about that. Yeah. Subtitle of a subtitle, paying dues is for other people. What do you mean by that?
I never worked my way up in anything. I put this together specifically for my boys. Now they've graduated college, they're starting their careers, and they had heard me telling a lot of my stories, but I wanted to put it down in a way where it's not only the story, but what I learned from each thing, for good or for bad. Not everything worked out, but I would always find my way very quickly to the top of whatever I was doing. Thus, I didn't pay my dues. There are shortcuts to a lot of things. And a lot of it's looking for open doors, putting your foot into it, kicking down closed doors, looking at ways around things, but also kicking butt to do everything you can to succeed without going through all the other steps. And so hopefully they've taken all of this to heart. But it literally, for instance, for the first commercial I worked on in Hollywood, as the first time I worked as a PA, because I didn't start as a PA. I started as a construction coordinator and then was art director 3 weeks later. Production assistant, the lowest position. I was asked as a favor to a friend to be a PA, a production assistant on a commercial. She was production managing or something and had lost some people and just needed some help. She knew she could trust me. I said, well, I don't do PA work. I'm an art director. She goes, look, I just need help for a couple of days. You'll meet people. Fine. I went just to help her. I was running the art department by lunch. So, this has always been my life. The first time I designed some training programs it was for my dad. He had gotten into selling real estate and he was working for Keller Williams in the early days. I designed a training program for him because I didn't like the way they had set it up on paper. And Gary Keller, the creator of Keller Williams, saw it and bought it for a national rollout to everyone that they did. And then it became the biggest real estate company in the world. My very first time doing training. And I created something on the computer. There was no online yet. So, every time I do something, not every time, but so many times, I've got 36 chapters in the book, I jump to the top of something, and a lot of it's attitude, how to approach things, and that's all part of what the stories are in the book.
Now, there's a line in Back to the Future, I think it's the end of the first movie, where he says, roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. In your world, it'd be ladders. Where I'm going, I don't need no ladders because I'm starting at the top.
Yeah, it's some of it's luck, but at some point after doing it dozens of times, I stopped looking at it like luck. It's like, all right, I'm doing something here, and it just works. And my boys are doing it. I mean, they're succeeding incredibly well. I mean, they just turned 25 a couple weeks ago, and one of my boys just leapfrogged 3 positions in the company that he's in, and the other one, his very first sales position, he's a sales engineer. His very first position is in the number 1 biggest territory in the world for carrier. So, he literally can't go to a better area, and he started there. I'm assuming they paid a lot of attention because it's working. It's absolutely working for them.
Well, I love hearing that because I'm 59 years young and I was raised by my parents. They've both passed away, that you have to go up the ladder of life. And now that I'm 59 years young, I can look back on my life and look at the number of people who did not go up the ladder. They just did what you did. They go like, no, why work my way up? Let me go to the top and see how it is up there. And it can be done. Not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it can be done. So I want people to, it may be a paradigm shift to push that aside and go, can I start at the top? Why can't I start at the top? So back in the 50s and 60s, work your way up. But now, as you have proven and so many other people have proven, you don't always have to start from the bottom.
No, and then look, and it's not 100%. I mean, there's a whole section in my book called screw ups. I use a different word in the book.
Thank you for keeping it clean.
I remembered. So, and I wanted to be honest with the readers and with my boys. It doesn't always work. And there are times where going up the ladder, working your way up through the different positions, you understand why things are done a certain way. And there are times I didn't know that. And I jumped right in with both feet and went, oh, I didn't know that because I hadn't gone up through the ranks yet. But then again, all right. So a quick example. So when I first moved out to Hollywood, I wanted to work in animation. So I took an animation test. I could do the drawing, but when you organize your artwork for the camera guys to shoot it, it's called a dope sheet. You write down all the different layers of the art, and this drawing goes between this one, this much time between them, that type of thing. So it's called a dope sheet. I'm self-taught because I didn't work my way up. I just played around with doing all that stuff, and my dope sheets work great if I'm also the cameraman. So I do an animation test for He-Man, Masters of the Universe, and I take it to the camera department. They run it, and everything is off. The timing is off. He runs through walls instead of sliding up to them, that type of thing. Again, because what I wrote down was not the industry standard. It just worked for me. So I put away animation for a while. Started working live action. I'm working with Roger Corman and all these other guys. And then 15 years later, digital ink and paint comes out. And I thought, well, let me try this again. So I buy myself digital ink and paint system. I train myself on it. And I start looking for clients, showing them samples of what I've done. My very first client is Disney, animating Tinkerbell for the launch of the Disney Cruise Line, which launched my animation studio. So my first professional animation gig is animating Tinkerbell for Disney. So whereas I failed at my first attempt, my first success was I'm now producing and directing and animating Tinkerbell for Disney as my very first job. I think that's a pretty good leap to the top.
Yeah, I would think. Let me ask you this. Why do you think so many people are still going through life the old way of going up the ladder? instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to shoot for the top. Why do you think that is? You think it's the way they were raised? You think it's the way we're still doing things the way we've always done them and we haven't like shifted our thought processes?
I think it's a combination of two main things. One is definitely the way you're raised. That absolutely has something to do with it. And it's not even necessarily what you're taught as you're being raised, but it's the attitude that your parents implant on you. And the other is confidence. A lot of times those go hand in hand. My parents raised me to have a tremendous amount of confidence. Too much, some people would say. I'd say I've done pretty well. So it worked out for me. Some people their parents always say, why would someone hire you? I mean, my wife, unfortunately, her father was just horrible to her as she was growing up. So she had confidence, but it was self-gained. It wasn't through the way she was raised. Whereas my parents not only always told me I could do anything, but then gave me a tremendous amount of responsibility. I mean, my dad, after he was an engineer with Shell for years, and then he started building custom homes, very, very large custom homes in Houston. At 14, I became his superintendent. So I ran all the job sites all through my teen years. Well, that gives you a tremendous amount of confidence where I can tell older people what to do, bigger people what to do. I was in charge of a lot of money. I was in charge of a lot of crews. So by the time I go out to Hollywood to venture forth on my own, what could possibly get in my way? No one can intimidate me. Here I was 14, 4'11", and 87 pounds, telling guys 300 pounds and 3 times my age what to do. When I got to Hollywood, the confidence is there just because of my upbringing.
My parents were born in the 1940s. Dad was 41, mom was 44. I was born in 1965, and they told me, this is how it works, son. You go to school, you go to college, you get a job, you retire, and you die. And from an early age, I said, I reject that. I don't want to retire. I can't imagine retiring. I mean, now, if you want to retire, that's your choice. But for me, I spent all these years in college, and I'm not even in the field that I went to college for. And I think when a youngster asks me, should I go to college? I'm like, well, it depends on what you want to be. I mean, I definitely want my doctor to go to medical school and the lawyer to go to lawyer school or law school, I should say. Yeah. But I think that you need to really stop and think, what do you want out of life? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I think he didn't finish school. Bill Gates didn't finish school. Steve Jobs didn't finish school. So you can achieve success by not going to school. And no matter what age, if you're thinking about college, go speak to someone who is in the field that you are in. I'm not talking about, again, lawyers and doctors and stuff like that. And ask them, how do they get where they got? Because they may tell you, oh, I just did X, Y, and Z. And college may not be part of it, because I want people to understand you have a choice. I can never imagine being retired. I saw my grandparents retired. Now, it was interesting when my parents retired. They were retired for about 2 years. They traveled the country. They moved to Orlando, south of Orlando, and they went to work for Disney. They couldn't stand still. And after my mom died in Alzheimer's, from Alzheimer's in 2022, my dad was constantly puttering around the house before he passed away in April 2023, working on things. He was 82 years old. So he could never sit down in the rocking chair and watch TV. He hated that. So I want people to understand, you don't have to retire if you don't want to.
No, and the whole thing, you bring up college, I have a degree, but people in the creative arts, you don't need one. And one of the things I tell people, I've worked in Hollywood now for 38 years. I've never once been asked if I have a degree, and I've never put on a resume. I don't really use a resume anymore, but I never put my education on because it wasn't relevant. And no one ever asked if I had one. So, what I tell people, well, first of all, don't go to art school. I don't believe in art schools. And the reason I don't is because learning art is in the individual. And yeah, you can get help from people, but where I got the most out of my education, because I got a double major, is business. I wanted to make money as an artist, as a creative person. So I studied marketing and finance and accounting and things that aren't exciting, but things that are harder to learn on your own. So I tell people, no matter what you're doing, and it's the best advice my dad ever gave me, he's like, study whatever you want, as long as you're also studying business, because everything is business. So I did. If you want to learn how to do a certain kind of software, LinkedIn Learning or other online programs. You can, especially if you're self-motivated. Now, not everyone is self-motivated. We have to take that into account. Some people need a bigger structure to get, an overhead structure to get through it. I understand that. Do what works for you. But if you're self-motivated at all, just find the stuff and learn it. I mean, I taught myself 3D programming. I never took courses in it. I taught myself storyboarding. I never took any courses in it. Of course, when I got started, there were no courses for these things. So I actually I've written the curriculum for 5 different universities to learn visual storytelling. I produced all the courses on LinkedIn Learning, on storyboarding. I've written books on it. So I knew that it wasn't there when I was coming up, but I didn't pull the ladder up after me. I built the ladder and lowered it to everyone else.
I love that. Reminds me of a person that reached out to me on LinkedIn a number of years ago. And they said, I want to be a coder. I'm like, that's great. We need coders in the world.
Yep.
And I'm like, so how many hours a day are you spending coding? And they told me none. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
There's kids right now, all they do when they're not in school is code. And
Yep.
What are you waiting for? And I don't know what they're waiting for, but if you want to be a coder, you should be learning on YouTube and Google or going to these meetups in your town to learn how to code. If you want to be a writer, well, don't wait to go to college. Start writing now. So I'm shocked the number of people say, I'm waiting. I'm like, waiting for what?
Well, everyone says if you're a writer, writers write. The saying isn't writers wait and go to school. They write. I've heard people say, yeah, I'm a writer and I do this, but then they're not writing anything. I don't say I'm a writer, but I've written 13 books and hundreds of articles. I just do it. So there's a huge difference between the dreamers who don't take step 1, or they take 1 or 2 and then stop, versus the doers who just put their head down and do it.
I once heard Brendan Burchard. Are you familiar with Brendan?
I'm not, no.
He's a personal development kind of guy.
Okay.
And when he always wanted to be a writer. So when he first started his journey to be an author, he started going to all these big authors he knew. And he asked them, I want to start writing. Is there a course I need to take, a certain curriculum at school? And what they all told them, without exception, is you want to be a writer? Write. There's no special notebook or pen or software program, just write. And I think if that will apply to most things people want to do. Now, obviously, if you want to be a surgeon, don't practice on your friends, but most things in life, just start doing it. Like when I started this podcast, I started it because in the spring of 2017, I heard Gary Vaynerchuk say, the future is voice and audio. Everyone needs to have a podcast. Now, I used to be a radio DJ back in the day. And so I went to Google and typed in those words. How do I start a podcast? Then I actually started my podcast. I didn't go to a podcasting school or taking a course on how to start a podcast. I just figured it out as I went along. Most things in life, you can do just that.
And you learned faster doing it yourself because you did immediate research and practice and trial and error. And you're not in the hole of however many tens of thousands a school would have charged you. And things like that, it's better to put the money into the proper equipment and whatever other training, or even hiring someone for an hour or two to help you with something that will leapfrog you beyond anything that you're going to get from a 2 or 4 year university. And I'm not against formal education. I have it, but it's not always necessary.
I agree. Now, speaking of writing, you told me before we hit record to remind you to talk about how you wrote your book, Start at the Top. You said you did it in a time-saving way. And as Mr. Productivity, when I hear people are productive, efficient, save time, my ears perk up. So share that story with us.
I knew that would catch your attention, Mr. Productivity. And that's one of the reasons I really love listening to your podcast, is because you truly do get into great tips and different ways. It's not even always a tip. Sometimes it's a way of thinking that gets you into doing something more efficiently. So I appreciate that. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't forget to talk about it with this book. So every time I write a book, and they're usually really different. Sometimes it's about a certain software, or it's about storyboarding, obviously what I do, or producing animation, right? There are different ways of doing it. But every time I write a book, I try to look at it. How do I want to approach this? And I want to do it in a way that makes sense, in a way that hopefully hasn't been done before. So when I was writing Start at the Top, the impetus, as I mentioned, was for my boys to help them succeed and grow quickly in their careers. And I wanted it to have my voice because it's for them. I'm telling my story in a way, hopefully, to inspire them. And like has happened with other things that I've done like this, as I started it, I realized, this is more than just for my boys. A lot of people can take advantage of this information. So instead of sitting and writing it, which you can end up canoodling and just messing with it and taking all of the flavor, the voice out of it, I told my story. I just recorded each story. And and I would send the recordings to someone who would transcribe it. And then I would just edit transcription, but not changing what I was saying, just making sure punctuation's right. If I messed up a word or whatever, I would fix that. But by doing the transcription, first of all, it was fast. Every night I would record 2 or 3 stories, send it to transcription. I'd get it back in the morning. And then it was just going through and making whatever adjustments so that it was clear. And all of a sudden I had a book. So it was a different way of doing it, but it held true to what I wanted, which was if you and I sat in a room and I'm telling you some inspirational stories, I want you to get that exact same feel from reading the book, like we're just sitting together and I'm telling you a story. And I was hoping that that would draw you, the reader, into it more so than just something that was flat, do this, do that. So it was by far the fastest book I've ever written. Because I didn't outline each story because I knew the stories. What I did was, here's a list of my stories, and I put them in a certain order because I tried to group them. So I don't know how many chapters, 7, 8 sections or something in it. And I grouped them together. And then I made little notes like, what did I learn about that? So once I had that, it's like, okay, story number 1, how I got Spielberg to hire me onto his show in 15 minutes. What did I learn from it? So I would record it, and then the next morning I had a finished chapter. I mean, it's incredibly efficient for that type of storytelling. I wouldn't do a novel that way, but for this type of storytelling, for me, it worked beautifully.
Wow, I appreciate that. One of the things I love about transcriptions and especially speak to text, people ask me, how do you write so many posts or comment on so many posts on LinkedIn? I speak the text. It's faster to speak the text and go back and fix the errors that it misunderstood or used the wrong word I was looking for.
Right.
Because then I get knocked out more. Because when you're speaking, you're in a different frame of mind and you're actually free flowing the thoughts. And you go, oh, I should take this sentence out, fix this word. And it's a lot quicker. So I love that. And the other thing I like is you're talking about transcription. Behind me, if you're on video again, behind me, there's a whiteboard. Okay.
Right.
I love doing what I call whiteboarding it. So my wife and I work in the business together. We have an idea. She'll come in here and sit down in the chair. I'll be up at the whiteboard because now we're writing it down and it gives me clarity. So a lot of people keep things in their head. You can't keep all these blocks in your head. Write them down on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard, a chalkboard if you're old school, because when your eye sees it, you're like, oh, wait a minute. What if we move this over here? And yes, I know you have Trello and all this stuff. For me, I like the whiteboard. I like to be able to write on the board. I know there's a lot of Trello people listening to the show. If that works for you, fine. But do you feel the same way? Do you like a whiteboard or a chalkboard or something like that for your ideas? Or are you mainly just on the electronics?
I do it on the computer just because of the way I can grab and move things around. Okay. So, but I do outline that way, and I do always put it down. I try not to keep things on my head because I like to sleep at night. If anytime you write something down, you put something down, it's out of your head and your mind can relax.
Yep.
If you're trying to hold too much in your head, your mind's going over it and over it and over it, and you're not going to sleep as well. So I don't forget things because I don't have to remember them. I put it down and I quickly clip and drag and move stuff around. And for me, it's a very quick way of organizing everything.
Yeah, that's actually proven by science that your brain, it depends on the individual, but average 7 things we can keep in our brain. And you keep adding more things, your brain is desperately trying to hold on to all these things. But as soon as you have recorded it someplace, your brain knows, oh, they put that in the note. They wrote it in the journal. They put it in the whiteboard. Now it can let it go. It actually is proven. So if you are at the end of your day and you're so frustrated, you're so overwhelmed with everything in your brain, well, before you go to bed, grab a piece of paper, write down all your thoughts. Once your brain sees them recorded, then it can let it go and you can get a good night's sleep. Trust me, I can tell you with 100% certainty this works.
It does. And in fact, it's more than just even that, but it's also to-do lists, work lists, right? Mm-hmm. Which does two things. One, you don't have to remember what you have to do tomorrow or later that afternoon or the other. But what I really get a lot out of it, it's also goal setting and goal achieving. Because every time I mark off something I did, you get that little rush of adrenaline of completion. Mm-hmm. I'll do it. I do this to the point because I have a to-do list I keep that's on my phone, but it also backs up on my computer. So no matter where I'm looking, I can click something off. If I complete something that I hadn't put on my list, I write it on the list just so I can check it off. I'm crazy about that. But it's that sensation of completion that you accomplish something that for people who don't do it, you don't understand the power of that to keep you motivated and moving.
One of the things I do is about 8:15, I take a hot shower and then I go in my room and I will journal and I will read either a Kindle book or a print book. Mm-hmm. But if a thought based on something I'm reading, if a thought goes, ooh, I have to check this, I don't check it then. I add it to my to-do list for tomorrow. This way, again, my brain knows, okay, he wants to check on X. He recorded X. Now my brain lets it go. And you could do this with notebooks. I tell people, if you're on a call, have a little notebook next to you, a little index card, and a thought comes to your head, write it down. That way, now don't write a whole paragraph, just write enough. Oh, he's got, if you're on video again, you can see
I have my notebook always with me for that very thing.
Yeah, because you're going to have these ideas come up at the most inconvenient time. And you're going to try to figure out what it was you had to remember because your brain's going to let it go. But what I see a lot of people do is they're on a call and they get this idea. What is the biggest city of this small town in France? And meanwhile, you're supposed to be on a call with your boss and your team. And you're like, no, just write it down. And here's the thing. Later on, you're like, why do they want to look this up? Because you delayed it. See, this is a big productivity tip for people listening. If you delay looking up, Googling, YouTubing, whatever that thing is for a couple hours, you may pick your list up and go, cat, baby, what? And then you're like, and then you forget about it. But if you would have let yourself go down that rabbit hole, well, that very rarely ends well.
That kind of leads you to one of the biggest lies that everyone tells themselves. Oh, I'll remember that idea. No, you're not. I can't tell you how many times I thought, oh, I'll remember that. And then I don't, which just reinforces why I write down so much. Or I'll text myself. If I don't have my notebook handy with me, I'll text myself. Or if I'm driving, I'll do a voice to text. So I don't have to look down anything. I'll just send myself a voice text. And then that still reminds me of what I need to do.
I literally found this out about a couple months ago that there is such a thing called note to self. Now, I discovered it on Signal. Signal is my favorite instant messaging because I like having privacy. But I found out that iMessage has it too. I'm like, oh, I didn't know such a thing. So I'm a daily runner. And I'm not going to bring a notebook when I'm out running because first of all, even if I did stop, it's going to be sweat over the notepads and it's easier. But now I'm like, oh yeah, just text yourself. People kept telling me this, and I didn't realize there's a feature in iMessage and Signal. I don't know if Telegram and WhatsApp now that, but there's a note to self. So you can actually text yourself and it'll be there. The main point is you're recording it. But I got to ask you another question before we end up here. What are your thoughts about AI? I love AI because as a podcaster, one of the things I hated is coming up with a title. Now what I do, well, not me, my wife, what she does, she edits all my podcasts. When she's done with the transcription, what she does, she throws it in the Claude AI. I love Claude AI. And they'll scan it in a microsecond. It'll scan like this entire episode and come up with an SEO-friendly title. And then it gives us the podcast description, the meta description. And then I say, give me a readable blog post based on a transcript because nobody wants to read a transcript. So when you go to Mark's webpage on my website, when this episode is released, you'll see the video from YouTube up there. And then underneath it will be a readable blog post. Now, I cringe to think about creating a blog post from this episode, but AI makes it so easy. So do you use AI at all during your day?
AI is a very large term. It means a lot of different things, and we have to be careful on what we're talking about. Especially being an artist, the term AI generally means image creation, which I'm totally against, because AI image creation is not creating anything. It is pulling other people's copyrighted and owned work illegally and then putting something out for someone who didn't actually create anything. It's just theft. And it's a big, big deal. But AI is also coming up with notes. It's also like you were talking about. I love using it for that. I use AI every day to pull backgrounds out of reference photos. When I'm drawing on my storyboards, characters running, characters doing whatever, a car somewhere, and the backgrounds just add a complexity to it. And I'd rather it was just the object or the person that I can draw from. So I have AI. It looks at it and pulls out the background. So things like that, it's incredibly useful. I use it on some of my Zoom calls where it'll summarize what was in the Zoom call. So that saves me a tremendous amount of time. So
that's great for, by the way, coaching clients. So I don't have to take copious notes because I know Zoom AI is going to record the conversation. And basically, I just copy. I hate that word basically. I got to break my habit of that. I take the Zoom AI summary and I don't copy and paste it. I will tweak it, then send it to my client. This way I can stay more fully focused on the client instead of half paying attention to the client while taking notes. So in that aspect, I think AI is awesome.
Well, 2 days ago, I did a big training on the software I helped develop called Storyboard Pro. I did it for a bunch of the world's top live action story artists. And I recorded the session. We did it live, but a lot of people couldn't make it. So I recorded it. And Zoom AI broke this one big video into relevant chapters. And as you hover on the thumbnail for each chapter, it tells you what we discuss in that chapter. So they can click right to it. It also created a running, it was more than just summary. It was literally the running transcription of the entire thing, which is hot linked. So you can actually search for a certain term like brushes. We were talking about making custom brushes. You could search for that, click on it, and all of a sudden you're there at that part of the video, all AI driven. That's phenomenal. But it's also not theft. So,
well, exactly. Like when I use AI, here's a little inside baseball for those who are on my email newsletter. I don't write newsletters every week. What I do is I go back to like single digit, double digit episodes. I put that transcript into AI. I say, okay, freshen this up, take out all the outdated stuff. Then I take that. I'm like, okay, I add some stuff to it. So I'm already, because I got tons of content. And people got to hear it over and over again. I freshen up, make it look really nice, and I put the newsletter out. Because I talk about the same thing. If you look at any content creator, not artists, because obviously you got to create something new, but most content creators, whether it's Gary Vaynerchuk, Grant Cardone, they say the same things over and over again because they have to. People need to hear it over and over and over and over again. But I want to pivot here to something we talked about in the first show. But I want people, don't go listen to the first show because I was a horrible interviewer back then. I want you to listen to this one. Let's talk about the secrecy of when you worked on The Walking Dead, on Stranger Things, because obviously you couldn't tell your friends. It was about a secrecy. So give us an inside glimpse of what it's like to work on these big shows when you're kind of like working for like, I don't know, the Secret Service or FBI. You can't tell anybody about the shows.
I can't tell them about details of the shows. I can say I'm working on it.
Okay.
But I can't say anything about what's happening. And some of these big shows, Walking Dead is a big one. And it's literally in the contract that I owe them $1 million for every time I give something away. I mean, they take it really seriously. Stranger Things the same way. I just got finished working on a new Blade Runner that's coming out. And I can't say anything about that, obviously, because everything would be a huge reveal. I can say it's public knowledge that it's out there. As long as something, and I'll actually Google things to make sure things are public before I mention anything. So 2 or 3 of the actors are mentioned online in numerous articles. So I could talk about that. Who they play, I can't say anything. how the setup. I can't say anything, nor do I want to. I also don't want to give away that kind of stuff. But one of the hardest things about working on actually any production, doesn't matter how big or small it is I can't show any of my work until after the show or the movie has been released. And in my industry, we get booked based on the quality of the projects that we're working on. So there are times I have to wait 2 years before I can show any of my work. Luckily, some of these big things, if I tell someone, I did 9 seasons on The Walking Dead, they're not going to say, let me see the most recent. They're just going to go, oh, cool. What's your rate? So, it gets to the point where I have enough. But, my style is still evolving. I'm still making changes on how I do it. It's still trying to be better. So I want to show the latest to show you, I show myself in the best possible light. But my best possible light that you're going to see is generally a year or two ago.
Okay. Now, tell us. Now, obviously, I can show this because you sent it to me. Now, again, if you're listening to the audio podcast, you're missing this. Okay, so I'm going to show. This is some Stranger
4. Things.
Hopefully, I can get this on the screen, right? So, tell us a little. You actually drew these things, right?
I did. Yeah, this was from episode, I think, 5 of season 4, which was at the time we were recording this. The final season 5, is being shot. So this is the second to last season. And I would sit with the director and we would walk some of the locations like this. This is a Russian prison. And that was a set. So he and I would walk the set. We'd point out, we'd kind of figure out what is the action. He would tell me his thoughts. I would give him my thoughts. I'd take a bunch of reference photos. I would sketch all this out in really, really rough form, get his approvals. Then I would come back to my studio here where I'm sitting, and all this is digital. I draw digitally. And then I would clean up, add all the notes, add the dialogue. I like to add motion, so they get what we call an animatic. It's a video storyboard, so there's camera motion and timing and everything. So you can really watch it like a very limited cartoon to see, is it really working? Does the timing work? Does the action work? And then the storyboards like you saw there, and the animatic goes to all the crew heads and post-production. And then production can figure out what's the budget going to be. There's all these shots. So how much can we shoot in one day? So they budget and schedule based on the storyboards.
So I have to ask this.
Yeah.
When you are watching other shows, do you look at them differently than us mere mortals?
If it's not very good, yes. And the reason I say it that way, if it's really well done, I get drawn into it and I don't think about anything other than the characters and story. Okay. But if I'm bored, then I'm breaking it apart and I'm thinking, gee, why was it done this way? Or they crossed the line of action, or, this didn't make sense. That wasn't followed up properly. But any Spielberg movie, I get lost in it. And so one of the things I tell people is, if you want to study filmmaking and how to break down shots and how to visually tell a story, turn off the audio before you start watching something. Because it's easier to pay attention to the edits and, I'm doing a close-up here. Okay, he's doing a slight camera move. Why is that a move? Okay, well, that makes sense. You can actually pay more attention to it than if the audio's on, because if the audio's on, it's really good. You're going to get drawn into that story, and now you're no longer breaking it down at all. So that's a helpful little tip there. Turn off the audio if you want to pay attention to the craft of it and not get wrapped up in the story.
How difficult, probably not now, but how difficult was it for you when you first started doing these things like Stranger Things, The Walking Dead? You got 2 boys, got a wife, and you got friends. I'm sure they're like, oh, come on, Mark, just give me a little something. How difficult, when you first started, how difficult was it to say, hey, no, I can't?
$1 million hanging over my head, pretty easy.
Okay.
Pretty easy not to say anything. And I'll tell you, you only have to tell people a couple times. As long as you're consistent, it's like, I can't say anything. They stop asking. So it does, luckily it doesn't take long. And I won't even tell my wife. I mean, literally, no, I don't share anything because I don't want any possibility of something getting out. And for you, the viewer, look, it's exciting to see this stuff. I don't want to ruin the surprise for you either.
Thank you for saying
this is for the fun of the viewer. And because I work on so many projects and I'm overlapping things all the time. I mean, I'll work mornings on one thing and evenings on another, that by the time it comes out, I forgot. So I'm watching and go, oh, I didn't remember that's what happened here. And so for me, it's just as much fun to watch it because I forgot.
You know, it's one of the things, I'm an Apple fanboy through and through. And it really annoys me when all these bloggers, because they know people in China or wherever they're making their phones. And I want to watch the Apple keynotes. I'm one of those Apple dudes. I will watch
those are
the
fun.
keynotes live. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want to know. I want to be like Christmas morning, little boy, what does Santa bring me? I want to know. And I know it frustrates Apple because they want a surprise. And like, yeah, oh, here's a new iPhone. You already know what it's going to be. I don't want that. And I'm surprised Apple, they're worth like $3 or $4 trillion. Why don't they build an all fully robotic factory in Austin, Texas and go, okay, all you bloggers out there, you don't know anything because we're not making the new iPhone in China. We're making it in Austin. We haven't even started production now because I want to be surprised. The problem with the internet, 24/7, 365, everybody's spoiling everything. Yeah. And I think we're losing the preciousness of being surprised.
Look, I'm sure if it made financial sense, they would make it fully automated. Obviously, there's reasons why they do it the way they do it. Too many people want the glory for themselves rather than where the glory belongs, which is the original creators and the enjoyment of seeing it the way it's meant to be presented. You know, it's like when someone releases, visual effects of a movie before they're done. But that's everything. Work in progress is not as good as when it finally gets out there. Why ruin the excitement just so that you can say, hey, I released this? Well, who are you? Who cares? You're nothing in this equation. Let's see the Hulk in his full glory, the way he's meant to be seen when everyone else sees it and enjoys it. But far too few people think that way. I want you to enjoy it the way it's meant to be enjoyed.
If I was ever Apple CEO, I would have my marketing department put out all this false information about the new iOS, the new Mac, and then come up on stage and say, okay, you guys been reading about all the new features? We seeded all that. Ain't nothing that's going to happen. And have people go, what? I just like being surprised. I think in this age of social media, we're losing the element. Well, I got the inside hook on what the new iPhone is. Well, keep it to yourself. I mean, some people want to know, but then when you get it, it's like, oh, I already heard about this 6 months ago. Then it doesn't feel. Now, maybe most people listening to this show are going, I disagree. I still like being surprised.
Well, but it does something else, too, because what you hear may not be true, or it was true at that time, but then for some reason it ended up being pushed or it didn't work and they got rid of it. What you don't want to do is set up false expectations, because even if something is fantastic, but someone expects something else, the reviews are going to be poor. So it's not helping anyone at that point. It's like a movie that's being marketed as a comedy when it's not, and it's actually a drama. It could be the best drama in the world, but people are expecting one thing and getting something else. They're going to think it's a terrible movie. So that's bad marketing or bad information being released. You have to be very careful with that type of stuff.
One final question for you as a story booker, a story builder, however you, how the actual term doesn't matter, but you create these storyboards and then you give them to the camera department. Do you ever talk with the director and he goes, hey, Mark, why did I'm a little confused on this storyboard? Or have you been doing it so long that you pretty much know these directors and you know exactly what they want?
Well, I actually do it with the director. There's never a surprise. I mean, by the time I'm off, like we'll do meetings like you and I are doing right here, and I'll share my screen as I'm drawing. I get approvals from the director during our first meeting, and most directors know exactly what they want. So I can get into their head, and then I'm adding my expertise to make sure we're getting all the shots and things like that. And there are a number of times, depending on the project, the DP, the director of photography, the head cameraman, will be on the call with us, because a lot of times they have specific ways that they want to shoot something, especially if we're doing a one or a really long shot where you follow a character through lots of locations. They're on there as well. So it's a collaboration. We're working together. We're coming up with it. So it's never a surprise. I don't just hand something to the director. It's the director's vision. I'm capturing their vision and then enhancing it however I can. So by the time they get it, they already know what I'll send them the final after I finish drawing everything up. But at this point, I know exactly how to put in all the notes and the arrows and visually represent something so that hopefully there are no questions and the clarity is there for everyone to now move towards exactly what the director wants. It's kind of like if I told you build me a 3-story house, that's not enough information. But if I work with an architect, the architect puts down exactly what I want and hands you a full set of blueprints, you know exactly what the house is going to look like. As a storyboard artist, my storyboards are the blueprints. They're the architectural renderings that everyone else uses to create these masterpieces you see on film and TV.
Well, I will tell you this. There's a couple shows that are coming up that are, my wife and I subscribe to Apple TV Plus. Severance, incredible show. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. And then Silo, incredible. I mean, those two shows are going to come back to back. They are really, really well done. And I'm like, where are they going with these shows? And now when the new seasons come out, I will think of you. For All Mankind, another show.
I love that too, but you're on Apple all the time. Have you seen Bad Monkey?
No, I have not.
That's the new Vince Vaughn series. The last episode, at the time we're recording this, the last episode is about to drop. And that's another one of my shows. I storyboarded that whole series.
Now I'm going to go watch
really
it
good
because you help with it.
Yeah. So it's a good one.
The book is called Start from the Top. And I'm sure you can get this at Amazon or wherever you buy books.
It's on Kindle or print on Amazon. Have at it, and hopefully it'll help you succeed beyond your dreams.
And where would you like people to go if they want to find out more about the wonderful world of Mark Simon?
LinkedIn is the place you can find me. Just look up Mark Simon or Mark Simon Artist. I'm very easy to find. Everything I post is on there. Okay.
Mark, I want to thank you for coming back on the show. So after you go pick up his book and you connect with him or follow him on LinkedIn, hop on over to MrProductivity.com, MISTER, MrProductivity.com. I am also on LinkedIn, but instead of trying to figure out how do you spell Struczewski, at the bottom of my webpage, there are 2 links, LinkedIn and my favorite platform, Snapchat. So yes, I am on Snapchat. I'm 59 years young. I love Snapchat, MrProductivity.com. Mark, thanks to you so much for being on the show.
Always a pleasure. Great seeing you.